In 2015, a retired professor of special education named Dr. James DeLeese, and you can see him here, published an article in Education Week that generated a ton of healthy debate. And the article was titled, "Differentiation Doesn't Work." And I think the best way to highlight and debunk Dr. DeLeese's argument is the cartoon that ran alongside the piece, which you can see now on the screen. The cartoon shows a teacher seemingly offered individualized instruction to a single student while, we imagine, the rest of the students sit waiting like customers at a deli to take a number and, maybe in a few hours, receive a shot at their own lesson. This is a straw man argument, as no advocates for differentiated instruction would suggest 35 different lesson plans or one-on-one instruction. And I'm certainly not suggesting that here either. Instead, with our time together, I want to focus on 3 areas where you might consider experimenting with some differentiation, with creating some alternate paths for your students to choose from. You can differentiate in terms of content, allowing your students some choice in how they gain access to what you've determined they need to learn. Or you might differentiate in terms of process, providing options for the activities learners use to make sense of that content. Or you might differentiate in terms of product, allowing students to select how they choose to demonstrate that crucial understanding. To continue that thought, I'd like you to consider for just a second, what is one thing, one topic, one issue, one field that you'd really like to learn more about? Okay, once you have that in mind, I'd like you to consider all the different ways that you might learn about that topic. Here are just a handful. You might interview an expert. You might watch a documentary film. You might read a novel. You might participate in a competitive game. You might compare amateur perspectives using blogs. You might read a nonfiction article or a textbook. You might attend a community lecture. You might participate in a skit or a play about that topic. You might visit a museum exhibit. You might listen to an audiobook, and you might see a fictional movie. And if I gave you some time, it'd be interesting for you to consider which of these options for learning would be your first choice for generating more understanding of that topic, and which would be your worst choice. And these are the kind of choices that we make when we talk about content. We're talking about what the students learn and how they gain access to that learning. This maze can be a helpful way of visualizing the teacher's role when it comes to content. You determine what goal is important, what is at the center of the learning experience. And then you determine what you're going to put in front of students to help them navigate the learning experience and successfully reach that goal. Traditionally, we offer students a single entry point when it comes to content, a single option for how to access the information that we consider essential. When we talk about differentiating content, we're not talking about adjusting what the students learn. Instead, differentiating content means diversifying how the students might gain access to that learning. For instance, I just recently started a unit on theater in my first-year literature course. And a typical first assignment might be to give them a shared body of knowledge about ancient Greek theater with a chapter from the textbook, because I think having some knowledge about the roots of theater is critical information. I put acquiring that historical background at the center of our learning experience. But I could make that same information more accessible to more students by differentiating that content, keeping what's most important, but offering students more than one single entry point. A manageable first step would be to create tiered reading using online resources. I might focus my choices on background knowledge. For some of my students, the textbook chapter might assume basic background about Greek history or theatrical conventions in a way that makes the information challenging to someone who hasn't studied either area much in high school. For others who did have a focus on those fields in the past, my textbook might be almost entirely review. I can triangulate to match their background knowledge with 3 tiered reading options. Or I could select a trio of parallel texts based on reading level if I decide to focus on that spectrum within my class's ability levels. Although differentiating according to tiered readings is certainly useful, I might expand my option set and give some thought to different styles of learning. My readings have addressed needs for learners who process information best by reading and writing, but I might give some further thought to auditory, visual, and kinesthetic learners. I might discover that some of my students don't learn as well from static text as they might from content delivered using audio or film elements. Here again, the internet is increasingly providing a wide variety of materials that could expand the number of entry points available to my students. You may have a group of students who are auditory learners and appreciate the opportunity to converse with an expert. For those students, a teacher-led interactive lecture through the material could be the best fit. Still, others might excel with projects that engage them in movement and activity, and for them a basket of masks and a few scripts might be the best entry point for exposure to Greek theater. So you can see that differentiating content is not about teaching different content, but about teaching content differently. I am determined that all my students are going to end up at the same place, but I recognize that different groups of them might arrive there more efficiently if the content was differentiated. Now, if you're like me, one of your reactions to this scenario is, how am I going to find different resources that emphasize the exact same things about an important topic I need to address with my class? And the honest answer is that you're not. One of the challenges and blessings of differentiation is that it forces us as teachers to be brutally honest about what is really essential information in our content area and what is really just nice to know. You cannot differentiate in the way that I've described above unless you're first very clear about what exactly you think students need to know about your topic, in this case Greek theater. That is the only way you can identify and evaluate possible resources to diversify content. If you as a teacher don't know what's at the center of the maze, you can't build multiple useful doorways. Could I imagine a classroom where there is a small group of students sitting for an interactive lecture from the teacher, while others read from textbooks or internet resources, or watch videos using headphones and laptops, while still others work through a reader's theater script with a set of Greek masks? Yeah, I can. I hope it doesn't feel like this is what I'm challenging you to do in your classroom. You've spent considerable time and energy looking over resources to determine text or other items that communicate clearly what you thought was most important about each part of your content area. Am I telling you to go back and find 5 more ways for students to reach that same information? No. Even if you became the most dedicated differentiation disciple, that kind of complex differentiation could be implemented gradually over several years for a single unit. Don't let me accidentally communicate this kind of either-or idea. What I'm challenging you to do, however, is consider adding one alternate path to one chunk of content. You don't have to build and find 5 new routes, but I think you can probably identify an area for your class where you might provide one alternate route to critical information. Or to go back to our idea of a maze, think about an upcoming unit of study with your students and consider one new doorway you might provide for students to access your content. Whether that's an alternate reading selected for different readiness level or a video that explores what matters most about the topic, without changing the goals you've determined as central to the learning process, is there one new entry point that might allow more students to access that information well? When you increase the options you provide students in terms of content, you also adjust powerful levels that help them learn. They are more motivated and have greater feeling of autonomy and self-control. There may certainly also be many times in your classroom with your content area when you determine that there is indeed one best way to reach a certain type of information, one best road. That one reading, that one video, that one set of articles is the optimum way for all students to access something that you consider critical. In those cases, you might consider what options exist for differentiating according to process or product. But we adjust curriculum when student need exists or adjustment could increase learning. Before we move on to differentiating process, I want to talk just a bit more about the issue of content. It might seem that identifying a range of content options is the huge hurdle if you want to become a more differentiated teacher. But I would argue that the biggest obstacle to effective differentiation is not finding strong material. The internet significantly has reduced that challenge, or time constraints, though they can be demanding. I would challenge that the biggest obstacle is fuzzy targets, starting a body of study without prioritized, crystal clear learning outcomes. To differentiate effectively, you have to be able to offer a precise answer to the question, what is the most important thing for students to know, understand, and be able to do because of our time together? Permit a personal example. When I taught at Fox Valley, the previous American Lit teacher had omitted Mark Twain's The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn from the curriculum because she felt uncomfortable about the racist language in the book and the portrait of African Americans offered by Twain's narrator, a white trash juvenile delinquent named Huck Finn. The honors English teacher felt the text had an important place in the curriculum and encouraged me to bring it back, which I did. I prepared carefully to teach the text, and I felt there were numerous defensible reasons for requiring students to read it. The book offered students an experience with Mark Twain, a giant in American literature. The book provided an opportunity for us to confront our nation's unsettling race history in the relatively safe space of fictional characters. The book offered a teachable moment about ongoing racial strife and the roots of those conflicts. The book gave students experience with dialect and regional writing, special talents on display in Twain's writing. And the book offered an important baseline as we sought to trace the development of a uniquely American point of view and perspective on the world. Even though I had all these reasons, I did not have a clear notion of my priorities in teaching the book. And a few years into teaching that text, this became a problem. The mother and father of one of my students, a white couple that had adopted an African American girl in my class, wanted to meet with me about the text. We talked about my reasons for reading the book, and they said that while they understood those justifications, the language was distressing their daughter, and they wanted to know if there was any way I could accomplish the most important goals through other means, to spare her some of the upset this particular text was generating. They were asking for differentiation, asking if I could provide the required content, but offer an alternate entry point out of respect for the feelings and needs of this particular student. Although I had plenty of reasons for using the book, I had not developed a clear sense of which were most important, and that proved paralyzing when I was considering their request. I was unable to articulate what was most essential about working with this particular book. If my most important goal is really for students to have some familiarity with Mark Twain, then that gives some direction to my response to that question, since he wrote 28 books and several short stories. Other texts could offer beneficial exposure to Twain's work, if that is my primary goal. If, on the other hand, my most important purpose is to confront our unsettling history with race in America, again, there are plays, young adult novels, and biographies and autobiographies that could tackle that same information with less of the explosive language that might have been prominent in Twain's book. And again, a last example, if my most important goal is to think about the teachable moment that I have to start a dialogue regarding race in America today, again, the clarity of that goal shapes my need and my response to differentiation. There are other texts that would prepare the students to make meaningful contributions to a conversation about racial strife in 2023 America. And recognizing that as my primary goal could allow me to direct students to those alternate readings. But I had only really considered a cloudy fog of goals without really prioritizing. So regrettably, what I did was I asked the family to give it another day or so and see if Huck's shifting perspective about his friend Jim changed the young woman's feelings about the text. They agreed, and that is a defensible response to their concerns. But looking back, I realized that I could have been better prepared to respect their request for differentiation if I had more clearly identified and prioritized my student learning outcomes.